Manny Pacquiao takes on Mario Barrios for the WBC welterweight title on Saturday, July 19th at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, at first glance, there's been a lot of uproar about the fact that Manny's 46 years old, he's had a 4-year layoff, and he's jumping right back in there to challenge for a world title belt. Now, I think those are valid points, but I think it's much more interesting if we do a technical breakdown of Mario Barrios and Manny Pacquiao. So let's break them down in terms of their defensive skills, their offensive skills, and then how they match up. At the end, I'll circle back to all this hype about Manny's age, his layoff, and whether or not he jumped the line. But let's start with the technical aspects. So we'll start with Barrios. Let's look at his defense. So Barrios favors the high double guard, but it's not the typical high double guard where someone has their both fists on either side of their head. Barrios likes what I call the peering through the window double guard, where it's like he's a little kid looking out the window at nighttime to see if Santa Claus is coming to bring him some presents or something. I see several flaws with that guard right off the bat. If you have this type of high double guard, you're right open straight down the center line for a jab, for a straight punch. In Manny's case, it would be a straight left. You're open for uppercuts that come straight up the center line. And you're also open for punches to come right behind the guard. So you're open for hooks to either side of your head. So it's not really an effective guard. Now, to his credit, every now and again, Barrios will lower his hands to more of a sort of conventional classic guard with his hands held at shoulder height. But that's only occasional. The other thing that he will do occasionally is Mario will occasionally parry punches with his hands. Okay, so let's take a look at Mario Barrios's head movement. Now, Barrios does have a very good level change with a weave underneath hook-type punches. He's also very good at slipping to either side. I like the fact that he does slip to both sides. He doesn't just stick to one side and become predictable like that. Finally, let's take a look at Barrios's footwork. So here's where I'm more than a little critical, just as I was of his high double guard. Barrios, I feel his stance is too wide. So unfortunately for him, that takes away from his height advantage. The second aspect of Barrios' stance is that he puts more of his weight on his front foot. So instead of having it distributed 50% front foot, 50% back foot, he's more like 70-30, I feel like, or maybe 75-25. So he's leaning a little bit on his front foot. And unfortunately for him, that also makes him a little bit more immobile, because just try it out for yourself. If you put more of your weight on your front foot, it's a lot harder to just glide around the ring and have very deft footwork. Notice that Barrios does not have live feet, meaning he does not bounce on the balls of his feet, which would allow him to move more fluidly and quickly around the ring, cut angles and whatnot. To his credit, though, Mario does have good balance. And at the very least, at least Barrios does not cross his feet, which you guys know I really can't stand that bad habit in terms of footwork. But Barrios doesn't fall into that category. Okay, so let's take a look at Mario's offensive skills. Well, one of his best weapons is his long, sharp jab. I feel that Barrios has a really effective jab. And the great thing about that is it sets up his best combination, which is his jab, straight right hand. That straight right hand, when he throws it, lets it go, it comes straight down the pike, and it's a very fluid motion. It's one motion, jab, right hand. It shouldn't be two separate motions. And Barrios is able to throw that effectively because he's so fluid with it. Now, here's the big issue with Barrios's jab. Unfortunately, he will often just throw a single jab. Not only that, but he leaves a long pause from jab to jab. So it would be like quarter note jab, 2 bars of rest, and another quarter note jab. Well, the problem with that is if that's how you're going to throw your jab, to steal a line from Jake LaMotta's character in Raging Bull, it defeats its own purpose. Jake LaMotta told his wife, hey, don't overcook the steak because then it defeats its own purpose. Well, if you throw a jab and then you wait for 5 minutes before you throw your next jab, it defeats its own purpose in two ways, both defensively and offensively. Because a single jab by itself with a long pause is not a good defensive weapon. In fact, it's the opposite, because you're giving your opponent the opportunity to counter off that first jab. The second thing is, if you wait that long to throw the next punch, well, you waited too long to throw the next combination. The whole point of that jab, if you're using it offensively, is to open up for a combination. So unfortunately for Barrios, that single jab with a long pause is neither effective defensively nor offensively, and in fact, it leaves him open. The other issue I have with Mario Barrios's right hand is every now and again, he will do what I call celebrate with it, which means instead of bringing the right hand right back to his chin, he kind of flings it up in the air like he's going to wave high, and then he brings it back to his chin. He doesn't actually wave high, but more than a few fighters do that. A lot of guys in the gym, when you just see rookies learning how to spar, they'll really celebrate that right hand. They land the right hand and then they fling it back up here. Like they want everyone to know, hey, I just landed that right hand. Okay. But not a flaw I expect to see in somebody who's at a world title level. So that's another bad habit that Mario Barrios has. One more aspect in terms of offense that I'm a little unsure about with Mario is the fact that he does like to throw a left liver shot off that jab right hand and then that left liver shot. But I've yet to see him do a lot of damage with it. So as much as he might love that punch, there's something that he's not quite getting, because I've not seen him drop anybody with it or stop anybody with it. So, there's just a big question mark with that punch. Now, finally, having said that part, Barrios also doesn't know how to fight on the inside. Instead of fighting on the inside, what he'll do most of the time is just clinch up. That's a sure sign of somebody who just doesn't know how to fight on the inside. So they're not really a complete fighter, in my opinion. Okay, so if it sounds like I'm very critical of Mario Barrios, I am, because I do see these as fundamental flaws that I would point out in any fighter. And I will come back to this when we discuss how Mario and Manny match up. Okay, but let's move on to Manny Pacquiao. Let's take a look at his defense. All right, so Manny, for the most part, uses more or less a rather loose classic guard, with one hand more towards, it's the other way, with his left hand more towards his shoulder and his jab hand a little bit more extended. Now, when Manny decides he's going to go into defense-only mode, he does shell up, which means he'll close his forearms right in front of him. He'll be just barely looking through his gloves, and he'll just stand there with a frozen torso and absorb punches. It's not a tactic I would ever recommend, because that's not what you want a fighter to do, certainly in the learning stages. But it is something that once you are on a certain level, you can get away with doing that if you know when and how to use it. So I have to give Manny a break on that one. Even though I don't like that tactic, I assume that Manny's doing that with a purpose, meaning he's saying, hey, go ahead, get your punches off. I've got something coming right back. Now, the downside to doing that, of course, is what if they actually do clip you either behind here or straight up the middle or to the body, and you don't have the opportunity to come right back with something? Well, I'll have to give Manny the assumption that he's figured out when and why and how he's going to use this defense-only mode and shell up. Okay, in terms of head movement, Manny is definitely not one of these slipping punches type fighter. But what he does is he uses level change in head movement to weave under, especially a right-handed person's, weave under a left hook and then turn and pivot to create a really oblique angle. That means his opponent has to turn and face him and literally walk into a punch as they're trying to reset from Manny's movement. Now that's a bread and butter Freddie Roach move. I've seen him, work that with Manny since the get-go. So if a right-handed person throws a left hook, Manny will step to his right at an angle, weave under that left hook, and then just pivot ever so slightly so that his opponent now is at a bad angle, and Manny has an opening for his straight left or for his right hook. So bread and butter movement for Manny Pacquiao, courtesy of Freddie Roach. So even though Manny's not one of these style fighters, what he does is very effective because he's not only defending, he's setting himself up to get in position to utilize his offense. Now, unlike Barrios, Manny is always on live feet, meaning he's always bouncing around on the balls of his feet. And if you look at the size of his calves, you can understand why he's able to do that for a whole 12 rounds. Now, what that does is by having live feet like that, Manny's able to change direction quickly, he's able to cut angles, and he's able to close distance rapidly. All things that Manny's known for. And in effect, really, Manny's footwork is the key to not just his defense, but also his offense, right? Because he's able to suddenly shoot in, hit you from an angle that you're just not expecting, or close distance so quickly you weren't expecting him to close distance that quickly. Ask Keith Thurman. But it's really a combination of the footwork that allows, that really carries Manny's defense and his offense. In terms of Manny's offense, well, Manny Pacquiao has that rare combination of both speed and power in his hands. He's not one of those fighters that has very fast hands, but as the cliche goes, can't break an egg. And he's also not one of those fighters who just loads up on single hard shots. In terms of specific weapons, Manny's jab is thrown properly, but he doesn't throw his jab as a power shot. When I say Manny throws his jab properly, well, I don't think Freddie Roach would stand for anything less from any of his fighters. So what Manny does not do with his jab is he doesn't paw with his lead hand. He doesn't post with it. He doesn't play that sort of patty cake jab canceling game that southpaws sometimes fall into when they fight an orthodox fighter. So Manny's mostly using that jab, not so much to be a devastating punch, but to set up his other combinations. Of course, hoping to get in that straight left or that right hook. Now, those are definitely two of Manny's best weapons. And when Manny Pacquiao first came to Freddie Roach, Freddie said he already had a great straight left hand and that Manny was really in love with it. But Freddie said he felt it was his job to bring out Manny's right hook, and he certainly did. And he instilled a lot of confidence in Manny with that right hook. I mean, just look at the fight versus Ricky Hatton as evidence. So the wonderful thing about having the solid straight left and right hook is that those two punches are what I'll call reciprocal punches. So if you throw the right hook, you're in perfect position to throw a straight left, and vice versa. If you can throw the straight left, you're now in perfect position to throw the right hook. And being that Manny's able to knock people out with either punch, it allows him to create more deception in terms of setting it up. If you fear both his left hand and his right hook, and you don't know which one is coming, you've got to be more wary. In the end, though, it's not really a single punch or even two or three punches that is Manny's best asset. It's really the whole picture, right? His footwork, his ability to cut angles, his ability to close distance quickly, plus these rapid fire combinations. That's what makes Manny so devastating, is that his opponents just don't know where he's going to be next, and they get hit from angles that they didn't really see coming, right? And it's the punches you don't see that knock you out. Okay, so let's take a look at how Barrios and Manny Pacquiao match up. But I want you to bear in mind that I am going to point out or reiterate Mario Barrios' flaws and describe how they play right into Manny Pacquiao's strong points. But bear in mind that these flaws that I'm pointing out about Barrios hold true for him fighting any fighter. They're just sort of innate flaws that, I kind of wish he and his trainers had adapted or had addressed a while back before he got to this world title level. Okay, but let's start with Barrios's wide stance. Well, by spreading his feet farther apart than they need to be, right away Mario gives away his height advantage. Okay, so that plays into Manny Pacquiao perfectly. Manny being typically the shorter fighter in the matchup. Well, if Barrios is going to give away that advantage, it's even better for Manny. The second issue with Barrios leaning on his forward foot, which makes him a little more immobile, that plus the fact that he likes to take those small, calculated steps, well, that again plays right into Manny's strong point of being the guy who's got the live feet and able to dart around to either side, create angles, pivot, bounce around some more, and just set up very unpredictable angles and positions and then throw those rapid fire combinations. So Mario's immobility plays into Manny Pacquiao's mobility. Next, let's take a look at Barrios's guard. Well, unfortunately for him, that peering through the window guard leaves him open for Manny's straight left because that center line is wide open. It also leaves the back of his head wide open for either a right hook or even a left hook, because sometimes when Manny creates these angles, a left hook, even though it's a hook thrown by his reverse hand, his rear hand at a certain angle won't be his rear hand anymore, if that makes any sense. So yeah, unfortunately for Mario, this guard just leaves him open in the front and on either side of his head. So not good. But what's even worse about this peering through the window guard is it squares up Mario's torso, right? If he would only adopt a more classic guard, right, that would allow him to turn his torso even 20 degrees. I mean, it'd be great if he could turn 45 degrees, but if he could even turn only 20 degrees, 30 degrees, at least he'd be presenting a smaller target area to his opponent. But for him to square up with Pacquiao, again, that just gives Pacquiao a bigger target area. So again, not good for Mario Barrios. Finally, Barrios' habit of throwing a single jab, then leaving 2 full bars of rest, and then throwing another single jab, that also plays right into Manny's strong point, because now Manny doesn't even really have to time Barrios, right? If he knows he's only going to throw a single jab, Manny just has to get ready. As soon as he sees that jab retracting, he can just start firing off a rapid fire combination. So it sort of takes I won't say it's like taking candy from a baby, but it's almost like that. If you're going to throw single jabs separated by long spaces, that's perfect for Manny. So now, finally, in terms of Barrios, I do want to say one more thing in summation about him. I feel a little bit like, yes, these are all fundamental technical flaws, but I think underneath all that is a bit more of an identity crisis with Barrios. And what I mean by that is I think Barrios has chosen to fight this way because he thinks, I am a warrior. I'm going to stand toe to toe. I'm going to slug it out. Yeah, come, throw as much as you want at me. I'm going to come back at you. And it's kind of like, well, you just gave away your natural gifts, which are this long, lanky build. I really wish that at the outset, one of his trainers had told him and say, look, buddy, you can still be a warrior, but let's take advantage of your height and your build. Let's learn how to use our footwork well. I mean, you've got long legs, so you can navigate the ring really quickly. You've got this nice, long, lanky build. Let's have you turn your torso a bit. So now you've extended your jab by a few inches, and you've put your right shoulder back. So now you have even more torque on that nice straight right hand. There's with just a few adjustments, you could shift the whole attitude and the whole game plan that Barrios shows in the ring. So let's break down the criticisms of Manny Pacquiao that seem to be the main talking points for this fight. So first, Manny's too old at 46. Okay, well, that's possible, but let's remember that 6 years ago, boxing experts were saying Manny was too old to fight at 40 years old to fight Adrian Bronner. And we know how that fight turned out, right? So those experts were Jim Lampley, the esteemed boxing writer Thomas Hauser, and Fred Sternberg, the PR representative for Top Rank. So I thought that was odd. I'm not sure if Manny was on the outs with Bob Arum at that time or not. But in any case, all 3 of those fellows said that they felt Manny was too old because he's 40 years old. And he kind of proved them wrong. But here's the real point. This is all taken from a documentary. And in the same documentary, Freddie Roach stated that he and Manny have a deal where if Freddie feels that Manny's slipping, Manny has agreed that he will stop fighting. I put my faith in that, because what motivation does Freddie Roach have 6 years later, meaning now, like what motivation would Freddie have to string along a fighter who he believes might be shot in Manny Pacquiao? Does Freddie need more money? No. Does Freddie need more time on TV? I don't think so. Does Freddie need to build up his reputation and get more attention? No. So what's the incentive? Why would Freddie want to string Manny Pacquiao along? There's just no motivation to do that. So my assumption is that if Freddie Roach was going to work with Manny and he's going to be in his corner for this fight, that's Freddie's stamp of approval. So if Freddie believes Manny's fine, I will go along with that. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's move on to the next issue, which is ring rust after a 4 years layoff. All right, so some folks will say ring rust exists, and then other people say, oh, it doesn't exist. It's just all in your mind. Well, I'll tell you firsthand from myself, from taking more than one layoff, ring rust does exist. That's not the issue. Is how long will it take you to shake it off in the ring during the actual live fight? For me, I feel it might take partway through the second round. Now, bear in mind, for women, rounds are only 2 minutes long, so that means maybe 3 minutes in. So that would be towards the end of a guy's first round. Or if I were fighting a 3-minute round, it would be towards the end of that. But I think for every fighter, it's different. The question is not really, will Manny have ring rust and will he need to shake it off? I think the answer is yes. The question is more, can Mario Barrios take advantage of those few minutes where Manny is still making that initial adjustment? And in my opinion, the answer is no. Mario Barrios is not that type of fighter that can come storming out the gate and throw massive flurries at Manny Pacquiao and just hurt him right out the bat. So while ring rust does exist, I don't think that Mario Barrios is the fighter to take advantage of it. Finally, third talking point about Manny. Does he deserve to fight for a world title in his immediate return to the ring after this layoff? Well, we could debate that one. It also boils down to dollars and cents. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But I think it's a more interesting question to ask. How did such a flawed fighter as Mario Barrios ever become a world champion contender? So to answer that, let's go back 4 fights. So 4 fights ago, Barrios fought and stopped a fellow named Giovanni Santiago out of Puerto Rico. And that was for the WBC's Continental Belt. So I believe that fight was a 10-rounder. Now here's the key point. Santiago normally fought at 140 pounds. So somehow the WBC and the state of Texas, I believe that's where the fight was held, in Barrios' backyard, somehow they figured that the 140-pound fighter is eligible to fight for this Continental 147 belt. Go figure. As a side note, it's kind of embarrassing if you're a world-class 170-pounder. Why couldn't you get rid of a 140-pound fighter much earlier in the fight, or actually knock him out? But that's another story. All right, so then the next fight after that Continental belt, see, this is why you want that Continental belt, because now the WBC can justify throwing Barrios in there to fight for an interim welterweight belt, which he won versus Ugas. So now Barrios has that interim belt. He defends it one time versus Fabian Maidana. He goes to defend it a second time versus Abel Ramos, again in his backyard in Texas, and Ramos fights him to a draw. Now, typically, if you fight somebody to a draw in their backyard, that means you won. But since it's a draw, Barrios retains that interim belt, right? So what's the whole purpose of the interim belt? Well, now that justifies him fighting for a vacant welterweight title belt. Does that make sense? So you have to sort of inch this fighter up that ladder. But clearly this has been like groomed by the promoter, the commissions, and the WBC. So why would anybody take the time and trouble to groom somebody like a Mario Barrios, who's not a hugely popular fighter, nor is he a really devastating fighter that's going to generate a lot of pay-per-view interest? Well, that's exactly why they want him, because he's like the opponent for the big names. So take a look at the 2 losses that Barrios has on his record. It's versus Tank Davis and Keith Thurman. So clearly, both of those guys are bigger draw factors than Mario Barrios is. So it's almost as if they brought Barrios along just to feed him to these bigger sort of A-list fighters at those weight divisions, either junior welter versus Tank, and then welter versus Thurman, and now welter versus Manny Pacquiao. See, because Barrios is less well known and not a draw factor, he takes up less of the pie that's given to the promoter by the broadcaster and, all the other sponsors and business entities who are throwing money at the project, right? So, for example, PBC is going to sell or sold this card to Amazon Prime, who is the broadcaster. And for sure, they dangled the fact that this is going to be a world title fight and Manny Pacquiao is going to be on the card. That's what, is going to be the negotiating factor to get more money from Amazon Prime, because we know that Manny has a huge following. That means more eyeballs and more pay-per-views being purchased. So Barrios is not really a factor in that, right? So that means whatever amount of money PBC got from Amazon Prime, now Amazon Prime isn't going to tell PBC, well, this is how we want you to disperse these funds to the various fighters on your card. They're not going to tell PBC how to handle their business. They're just going to allot them a certain amount of money up front, and then they're going to negotiate how they're going to divide up the pay-per-views, right? Maybe it's a 50-50 split between Amazon Prime and PBC. I don't know. In any case, now that PBC has this upfront money plus a percentage of the pay-per-view, now it's up to Barrios's management and Pacquiao's management to negotiate with PBC as to how much of a upfront purse they get, and then how much percentage of the pay-per-views they get. And usually the pay-per-view percentage is structured, right? If it exceeds this many pay-per-views, the fighter gets this percentage. If it goes beyond this, it's all a numbers game. But it's guaranteed that Manny is making at least 10, if not 50 times more in terms of a purse than Barrios, number one. And for sure, Manny is definitely commanding some of those pay-per-view percentage points. I don't know that if Barrios can command any at all, but that's, between him and his team. So why is there a motivation for the PBC to have that very B-side Barrios opponent at a world title level? Well, exactly because he doesn't command a lot of money, right? He can't. So that means there's a bigger piece of the pie from Amazon Prime left over for PBC to disperse as they want to. I hope this is starting to make sense to you. So on top of that, bear in mind, as I pointed out with the Tank Davis and Lamont Roach fight, there's an incentive for both the state commission, in this case Nevada State Commission, and the sanctioning body, in this case the WBC. There's incentives for them also because they get a percentage of the champion's purse. So who do you think they want to win? Obviously the person who makes the bigger purse, right? Because it's more money for them. So I'm saying that up front so you see the writing on the wall before we even get to July 19th, right? Okay, so having said all this nitty gritty, I would say in closing that for sure there's a bit of an unknown factor with Manny because he's been out of the ring for 4 years and because we don't truly know where he will be in the fight at age 46. I mean, for sure he and Freddie know where he's at in the gym at Wildcard, but it's a different story under the bright lights at the MGM Grand. So, unknown factor with Manny Pacquiao. But here's the interesting thing. The known factors with Mario Barrios is how flawed he is, and those things will not be able to be addressed in one fight camp. Like, there's no way Barrios is going to change his stance, change how he holds his torso, stop throwing single jabs with long pauses, and stop using this peer through the window guard. Even though there's unknown factor about Manny Pacquiao, I'd say the known factors about Barrios' flaws are so set in stone that that's why I feel that there's definitely an opportunity for Manny Pacquiao to emerge as the welterweight champion, holding that WBC belt on Saturday, July 9th. I predict that Manny will stop Barrios in the second half of the fight. How do you see this fight turning out? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, please do subscribe, hit the notification bell. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. Please consider joining the channel as a member. Right off the bat, you'll earn your white belt, and you'll get this cool little icon that shows up next to your name when we do our live streams. After 30 days, you'll be automatically promoted to your next belt, which is yellow. And from there, you'll go on to earn higher and higher ranks: orange, green, blue, purple, brown, and black. So those are judo rank belts, by the way. So in addition to earning the cool little icon next to your name, you also get priority replies in the comments from me. As well, you get early access to quite a bit of the content that we make. So if you would like to support, that would be wonderful if you join our channel as a member. Otherwise, you can always feel free to leave a super thanks, or join us on our live and leave a super chat, or head over to buymeacoffee.com and purchase a coffee in increments of $5. So thank you very much for taking the time to listen to this breakdown, and I hope to see you on our live stream. Hit the bell so you know when we go live.